Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here for this very interesting conference. So just a brief overview of what's coming up. So there is, of course, limited time, so my plan is to try to persuade you to go away and read the paper after the event. So first of all, I'll very briefly introduce what longevity risk is about and what my sort of involvement with it is. I'll talk briefly about how to model longevity risk and what still needs to be done in the future. Part of that modeling is about thinking about robustness, because without robustness in the models that we use and the decisions that we might think about taking, nothing is going to get done. And then finally, some comments on the hedging of longevity risk and how plans might approach that and the people that advise them. So first of all then, what is longevity risk? So the first couple of lines summarize what I'm thinking about in this context. It's the risk that a group of pensioners, so we're here at a pensions conference, so that helps to focus things. The risk that a group of pensioners in aggregate survive for longer, and I've here stressed than anticipated. So we can build in our forecasts of what might happen in the future in terms of mortality improvements, but ultimately there will be some uncertainty around that, and in particular the risk financially to pension plans is that people survive for longer, or that mortality rates are lower than we were predicting maybe 10 or 20 years ago. Now, with this in mind, the work that I've been doing and the work that I've tried to summarize in my paper is, first of all, looking at the stochastic modeling of future mortality rates, and a particular focus of some my more recent work, which I talk about in the paper, is the need to start to think about modeling multiple populations. And then alongside that, some of the current work in terms of modeling, it's also about thinking about where are the uncertainties within the data, because the data is perhaps not quite as reliable as we would like. The modeling then leads to the measurement of longevity risk, so that's an important category in its own right to be thinking about. So the models are not there for their own purposes, they're there to serve particular needs. So measurement is one of those. A second purpose is then going one step beyond that to think about how do you calculate reserves for longevity risk. And then lastly, if you decide that you're carrying too much longevity risk, then how do you go about managing that? So that the models are there to serve those particular purposes. Now, this chart here summarizes pretty much everything that's been going on within the modeling setting over the last 20 or so years ago. So just within this picture, we're looking at what models have people proposed for the future randomness in mortality rates. So it starts off on the left-hand side with the well-known Lee and Carter model from 1992. And then since then, there have been a number of different strands of work. Some of them have come from rather different directions. So down towards the bottom, there's the CBD model, which I developed 8 or 9 years ago, which had a rather different philosophy about it. And then up at the top, and this is a popular approach in the United Kingdom, there was the use of P-splines to model mortality rates in the past and in the future. And then over succeeding years, we've had new generations of model where the distinctions between these three groups of models have become blurred, so that some of the best bits of the different modeling approaches have been applied to different approaches, so that the CBD models have developed by including cohort effects and so on. P-splines have been brought into the Lee-Carter framework, etc., etc. And then lastly, there's just beginning to get going now are fully stochastic multi-population models. And in particular with multi-population model, when we're thinking about pensions or life insurance, we do want to be thinking carefully about what are the correlations between different populations, rather than just assuming that different populations are perfectly correlated. So that correlation question is perhaps one of the biggest challenges that's out there at the moment. So some of the challenges then are, and I've got at the top of my list, that we want robust modeling, and in the multiple population setting as well, also nevertheless in the single population setting. Alongside that, and I'll make some more comments about robustness on the next slide. We also want to have greater understanding of the modeling assumptions and the limitations. And this is not just for the benefit of the people that are building those models, but it's really about the communication of those models to the people that might be using the models in their everyday work. So these are people that are maybe not the great experts on stochastic modeling, or maybe pensions consultants and so on. But these are exactly the people who need to understand the model, they need to understand the assumptions, but also how far can you take this particular model in terms of the particular applications. So what should you use this model, what should you not use it for? And then on the data side, modeling challenges are, first of all, just the limited amount of data that we have. How many years can you use, or how many years are appropriate? What age ranges do you have, and what volume do you have in terms of numbers of lives within a particular data set, and what sort of quality do you have there? And then on the reliability side, again, it depends on which population you're looking at, but if it's a national population data set, then often the death counts are thought of as being very reliable, but then in the United Kingdom, we've recently seen that with censuses every 10 years, which themselves are not perfect, that the population that is measured, or the exposures, that there can be uncertainties there, and revisions to the mortality rates that get calculated as a consequence of that. So that's one of the challenges to us in the near future, is to think, well, how can we deal with that additional source of uncertainty? So much has been done over the last 20 years, but there are still some interesting questions that need to be looked at on several of these fronts. So there's a bit more discussion in the paper on that. Now, I mentioned robustness, and so we want to think about how to fit models to historical data. And we want robustness there. We want robustness in the forecasts that we get. And then finally, and ultimately the most important thing, is that we want robustness in the business decisions that we're going to take. And it's without robustness in all of these categories and a perception of robustness, nothing will get done, nothing will get measured, and no transactions will be made. Next, think about the hedging situation. So we've got a typical pension fund might have the choice between a customized hedge and an index-based hedge. Customized means that it's linked to my own population's mortality. Index-based perhaps means linked to national mortality, and that might be, say, using a Q-forward contract or an S-forward contract. And then thinking about the decisions, the question in my mind is, are pension plans getting the right advice? Are there consultants that are advising them really looking at the full range of possibilities? So, for example, why have there been so few index-linked longevity transactions in the last few years relative to the number of customized transactions? So what perhaps are the barriers to the growth of index-based hedges? Well, the first of these is a perfectly economically rational answer to that, that as a consultant, you've properly assessed the pension plan's risk appetite, and perhaps they are very risk-averse, and so therefore a customized hedge is the right solution for that pension plan. But often my perception is, from talking to people, that consultants often just avoid consideration of index-based hedges. Assessment of basis risk is perceived as being difficult. Assessment of risk appetite is perceived as being difficult. Communication of the hedging solution, it's difficult, it's new. And that, all of these things perhaps lead to a feeling that there's a bit of reputational risk, so therefore I'll not focus on that. I'll just do the easy solution, which is to recommend a customized hedge. Now, the last point I'll make is about really a very stylized example of what I think should be good practice. Good ERM means that you should be considering all options that you know are out there in the marketplace. And to make things simplified, so this is a very stylized example, think of something like expected utility as being a manifestation of risk appetite. So there are various options for risk management, so it might be no action at all, or individual buyout, so it's essentially buy a single annuity for each individual when they get to retirement, through to the index-based swap at the bottom. And then just a couple of slides, graphs that are in the paper. The first graph is trying to illustrate, in terms of on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, we've got the size of the liability that we're trying to transfer. So we have small schemes, plans on the left, large plans on the right, and in terms of the amounts that you want to transfer, the price per unit is going to change. But also in terms of the different lines here, what you can see is that different lines for different types of transaction, that they don't all start at the left-hand edge. So for example, with our customized longevity swap, you need to have you need to be a very large pension plan before you can go to a bank or a reinsurer to get that type of transaction. Whereas something like an index-based hedge might be accessible to a much smaller pension plan. And then there are other things in terms of the shape. So if you're a larger pension plan, then you will get a cheaper transaction per unit of risk transferred. And then, for example, the customized longevity swap, the price is higher per unit than, say, an index-based transaction, simply because you are the person that's taking on that risk, they know that it's a customized transaction, and therefore they can charge just a little bit more. Then we get through to the normalized utility. So which out of these different options should you choose? And of course, the point about an index-based transaction is that gives you a certain amount of basis risk. So you're not getting rid of as much risk. So that pulls your expected utility down, everything else being equal. But what I'm trying to do in this chart is to say, well, size does matter in terms of the actual outcome. So even if you have two pension plans that have the same utility function, so the same appetite for risk, they're on different positions on this size of liability on the horizontal axis, and so therefore just the amount of residual risk and the price per unit for a different type of transaction might result in these two pension plans having different optimal strategies. So the takeaway from this, it's a very stylized example, but it's certainly that you should not be thinking about one solution for every particular type of pension plan, but just to think carefully, assess the risk appetite for a pension plan, and then follow that through with a full analysis of the risks and the different types of outcomes. So with that, I will stop.
Thank you. Can I call Guy Coughlin up, please?